Now, there's been plenty of talk over the last couple of years about reviving some fairly audacious space travel missions outside our little planet. With the Artemis mission, for example, NASA's planning to put people back on the moon, including the first women and the first people of color, by 2025. Twitter's current owner, Elon Musk, has also been very public about his intent to make it much easier for us as a species to colonize Mars. He's working to make that a reality through another firm that he owns, SpaceX. But what if, for a moment, what if we thought much bigger? What would it take to get to our nearest star, Alpha Centauri, some 4.2 light years away? That, at least, is one of the goals of the 100-year Starship Initiative. Now, the program hopes to get us to work on a goal that big, that audacious, and perhaps in the process, we might be able to solve critical problems here on planet Earth. Earlier, I spoke to Dr. Mae Jameson. She's not just an engineer and a physician, she's also the first woman of color to go into space back in September 1992. She made the case for why, when it comes to interstellar travel, we need to be thinking really, really big.
What I find it really exciting is the fact that everything that we face in interstellar travel, as you said, reflects all the challenges that we face here on Earth today. So that is the challenges from the food security, from issues around sustainability, energy use, pollution, our microbiome. In many ways, we know a lot about how the future may develop, but a lot of it is dark because we couldn't have predicted, many of us would not have predicted exactly, 3.5 years ago that we would have had a pandemic that would have completely changed the trajectory we thought we were on. And so some of the skills, some of the ideas, the philosophies that ground us in looking at human interstellar flight from the perspective of a 100-year Starship, I think are very grounding for us thinking about the future of life here on Earth.
The program has been running for the better part of 10 years now. How exactly does this work? I know you mentioned grants that essentially are, put out there for, these moonshot projects. And in context, I guess moonshot is a bit of an understatement here. But how exactly would it work in practice?
So 100-year Starship was started with a very modest seed funding grant of $500,000 US to establish an organization that could ensure within 100 years we have these capabilities. So our idea for our proposal was that it not about this organization designing everything, making everything happen, but it's how do you foster the kind of environment in which big, audacious things can happen. And as we started off in 2012, we first had to tell the story because the reality is that most people thought that anything having to do with human interstellar flight, if you were a serious space person, you wouldn't even talk about it, right? That's one of the things you just sort of whispered about. But what we first had to do was change how people thought not only about space, but particularly about interstellar space.
Especially on the skill side, what sort of investments do we need to essentially make sure that we have a much, much bigger representation, especially of women, in the sciences that we need to essentially make sure that these dreams come into fruition? How do we create the environment that creates the next Dr. Mae, the next Katherine Johnson?
The investments that we need will help every child, will help every society, boys and girls, because it's an investment in education. We need to have investments not just in what people call the STEM fields or science and technology. We need to have it, yes, in the understanding, the observation of the world around us, in the behavioral sciences. We have to have the investment in the skilled labor. We have to have investment in every person. But if you want to get to the whole idea of how do we make sure that we use this incredible talent, experience that you have in women, you have in girls growing up, we have to change some things. And it's not changing the girls, it's changing society and it's changing who we are.
I know you've been working with the Kenya Space Agency in this particular event this year. So someone who's watching this perhaps might ask, how does this fit in? Where does a country like Kenya, with all the other things that it has to deal with, where does investments of this sort then fit into the wider problems that the country is trying to fix?
So as we start to monitor climate change, one of the most important tools we have are satellite imagery, right? So you get to see what the shift of the vegetation, the shift of water looks like. When you start to talk about doing mining or using the resources of the land, you can actually use remote sensing to look down and actually see the resources. I'm sure a lot of people have mobile phones, right? They have smartphones and they have GPS in the phones,
Yep.
right? GPS, global positioning satellite systems. That's space. So if you're holding your smartphone, you have a space device in your hand. And so I think, again, it's that awareness of what goes into space, even materials, different kinds of medical devices. A lot of what the big word is telemetry, that is being able to send a signal off the human body to instruments, the telemetry. A lot of that started during the Mercury and the Apollo programs because you couldn't have people wired up the same way you would in a hospital if you were monitoring their physiology. So there's so many things that happen, sometimes as a result of need, that we start to think, oh, well, space doesn't have anything to do with me, but we're using it every day. That doesn't mean that you're not investing in people. It doesn't mean that you're leaving all of this behind.